Well, good morning again. This is going to be um, us reviewing how to graph linear inequalities. So today we're going to graph the linear inequality y is less than negative x minus 4. And this goes with worksheet page 3 in Algebra 1. All right, so there's a couple of things you got to look out for here. The graph, and we're going to break this down to kind of give you an idea of where we're going. Graphing means, we're going to show all the points. So when we're graphing inequalities, we're going to use shading to indicate the points because there's going to be so many possible points out there, we can't possibly put dots everywhere. And it's essentially going to end up looking like a triangle on the graph. And I mean, you could try to put all those dots in, it's just going to take forever. So we usually just do something like that. So we're going to shade in part of the graph, and this part that we're shading represents solutions to the inequality. So to figure out where there's two parts of this triangle you need to know. First of all, you need to know, is this triangle above or below something? That's where the inequality comes from. Are we looking for stuff above or below? Another way of saying it is if it's above, it's greater than or less than. And when it's shaded like this, then you would assume it's above because the line would be going across diagonally. And that's where the linear part comes in. Linear means we're going to find a line and we're going to shade it on one side or the other. But this line represents the boundary line. So if you remember graphing y equals mx plus b, that's what we're going to do here to find that boundary of where that triangle is going to kind of begin, and then it either go above like this or to go below. The other thing though is that what if it's equal to? Because it might be greater than or equal to. It might be less than or equal to. Well, that's going to be the final thing to look at to wrap it all up if you want. But that's pretty easy to see. And basically, it has to do with how you draw your line. So we'll get there in just a moment. But these are the big pieces here. You're going to find your line, and you're going to decide, are you going to shade it above or below? Because it's greater or less. So let's get started. The first thing you're going to do is, well, we need a graph, right? So for this graph, I noticed that if I look at this as a relative equation is an equation created using something else, an inequality or some other statement that represents a similar situation, and we make it because it's easier to use. It's easier to start by graphing an equation, y equals negative x minus 4, than it is to graph the whole thing right off the bat, because this is our boundary line. So we're going to use the relative equation, negative x minus 4, and start that boundary line. And as we're going through this, you will see why doing the boundary line first is so important, okay? But you always want to do the boundary line first, then you can worry about the other stuff. So for this boundary line, the slope is always what's in front of x, and there's no number there. So we would call that a 1 because there's one x sitting there. So our slope would be negative 1. Oh, sorry.
Beverly to the front office.
And then our y-intercept is going to be negative 4. All right, so we're going to graph our line using that slope and that intercept. We always start with the intercept because it's our starting point. It's like our home base, if you will. So I'm going to go ahead and set up my graph. Try to make it pretty decent there. And if you don't have a ruler, just go carefully. Just remember when you set up your graph, when you set up your x and y axis, all of these scale markings need to be an equal distance apart. That's the big deal. And then if you're like me and you did this on notebook paper, I'm gonna grab my ruler and I'm gonna go like half a centimeter is pretty good to make those tick marks. It's up to you. It doesn't matter how far apart these are. All that matters is that the distance between these parts, these tick marks, is the same, so that it is truly like a ruler, like a scale on a ruler. The other thing is I've got -4 here, and it looks like if I go down 1, 2, 3, 4 on Y, I will definitely reach it. So I'm going to go ahead and make the Y's by 1. 1, 2, 3, 4, and that goes to 5 up here. And my slope isn't pretty crazy, so I'll do the same thing for my X's. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 goes to 5 there. And 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 backwards, so that's a -5. Okay, so the slope is telling us we need to go -1. So that's telling us two things. The negative tells us down. The sign always tells us up or down. So this line is going to go down, and the 1 tells us how far. That's going to determine how steep the line is. But before we do that, we need to start at this point. So remember, the y-intercept is the y-coordinate of some point on the y-axis, and you can write it like that if you like thinking of it as an ordered pair. So the point 0, -4 is going to be right here. Now I'm going to dry that off so that I can highlight that. So my y-intercept is going to go right here. And I will label it because I know some of you like to think of it that way. And then now the slope. So we need to take this, and you're going two possible directions, up and down, left and right. I should say 2 dimensions. So we need to take this number and make it into a 2-dimensional set of instructions. So we're going to take -1 and make it a fraction, top and bottom. And if you have a whole number, all you need to do is take a whole number, put it over 1, and bam, you got that number as a fraction. But remember, you can also have the opposite. So if I have -1 on top and +1 on the bottom so that it equals -1, I can also do the opposite. I can have +1 on the top and -1 on the bottom. So I've got 2 ways to move on my line from this point. So I can either go down 1, forward 1. So I could go down, forward, get here, and that's going to get me to the point 1, -5. And I could go down, forward again, and get to 2, -6. Or I could use the other fraction and go up and back, and that's going to get me to -1, -4. And I could do it again, up and back to another point. That's going to get me to -2, negative, no, that should be a 3. I'm so sorry. That's a 3. And this will be -2. Ha. Okay, because if we're doing it this way, this says we've got to subtract 1 on the y's. That's why. So I know that pattern will continue. -4, -3, -2. The next point should be at y equals -1. So if I keep going, there it is. Y equals -1. And x is going up by 1. 0, -1. I'm sorry, down by 1. Haha. So 0, -1, -2. If we go down by 1 again, -3. X is -3, y is -1. And you can keep going all the way across the graph. I always recommend you do that so you can have a nice pretty graph there. And you always want your graph to cover the whole, you want the line to cover the whole graph. And if you're doing this carefully, if you set these lines up carefully, notice it sets up in a very straight line without much work. And then I can just connect it by hand. It doesn't have to be a work of art. I don't know, this is kind of artsy, but there it is. Okay, so there's our line. Now the question is, going back to the original, okay, is it above or below? So to figure that out, you're going to look at the inequality symbol right here. And technically we have 4 inequality symbols. Okay, so let's write this down here. So inequalities can be just greater than. They can also be greater than or equal to. And then, as always, there's an opposite. Change it around, go the opposite. Less than. And less than or equal to. So we have to identify what the relationship is based on what they gave us in the statement up here. And right here, I could see that right now I have greater than. So think about what this statement says. This statement says, why? Well, it's not asking a question. Why did we have to do this? It's asking what values, what coordinates, what values of y. That's what that represents. And then the symbol comes next. That means are greater than. But I'm going to make a note here. It doesn't say equal to. So these values of y are greater than, but they are not equal. Okay? So where would you find that? Well, remember, this has its own axis right here. Here's the y-axis. So if you go to the y-axis, just find the part of the y-axis which is greater than negative x minus 4. That's what we just put. So it's greater than or not equal to the line. Okay? That's what y is less than. Sorry. Did I get that backwards? I got that backwards. Oh, let me reverse that. I understand it if you give me a dislike. Haha. I don't blame you. If you're watching that going, teacher, you're doing it wrong. You're absolutely correct. Unlike me. All right, let me get the white out. This is actually kind of a thing that happens when I haven't done something in a while. The first time I do it, I usually goof it up like that. But it's an easy fix. All right, so they're not greater than, they're less than. Whew. Let me dry that off a little bit. Okay. So we're looking for the values of y that are less than the line. And it's going to take a minute for that to dry. So if we go to the line's right here. What values of y are less? Well, the line is crossing at negative 4. The line's crossing right there at negative 4. So we don't include negative 4 because it's not equal. It's not equal, so we're not going to include negative 4. We're also not going to include the line because it's not equal to this whole boundary. And I'll show you what to do about that in just a second. But what's less? Is 5 less than negative 4? No. Is 0 less than negative 4? No. So it can't be anything up here if you think about it. All these points are bigger. They're greater, which it's not supposed to be, even though I wrote that down the first time. We're looking for less. Everything down here. Because this is our boundary. This is where it stops. Remember that when you're looking at a graph, the numbers are going up as you rise. So if you want everything less than something, that's what's below. The line is our boundary. Everything below that line is less. There we go. All right. So we shaded in that side because these are less. But what about but it's not, how do you not include the line? What you're going to do is you are going to, if you wrote it in pen like I did, you're going to have to erase a little bit, make it jagged, make it perforated. If you wrote in pencil, you could simply erase and make some open spaces there, okay? But that's what it looks like. So now the line is open. It's there, but it's like a fence. You can still see through a fence. You know the fence is there. It tells you where the boundary's at, but you can still see what's on the other side. So that's kind of like what you're going to have when you have greater than and less than. It's going to be a broken line to indicate this is the boundary, but we're not using those. Okay, I hope this helped out, and please send questions if you have any. Thank you.